wrath of voters to abolish the system designed to prevent corruption. They said natural justice demanded a root and branch reform. But today, only 46 out of 360 Tory MPs bothered to turn up to debate it. The Prime Minister wasn't one of them.
Rather than repairing the damage that he's done, the Prime Minister is running scared.
Will you apologise for the way you dealt with the Owen Paterson and Parliamentary Standards affair last week?
So what we've got to make sure is that we take all this very, very seriously and that we get it right.
To be clear, Prime Minister, you're not going to apologise for the way you acted last week?
Look, I think it's very important that we get this right. Also,
On News at 10 tonight. Yorkshire's new chairman praises Azim Rafiq for being a whistleblower on racism. 23 million Afghans are on the brink of starvation, says the World Food Programme. Battles on the Polish border as refugees are urged to cross by the Belarus dictator. Breaking tonight, the trapped caver is saved after 2 days underground. Love, Actually, Virgin and BA open a new era of US travel in tandem, bringing huge joy to families separated by the pandemic. And never going to give you up, Rick Astley in a concert to thank the NHS for keeping so many people alive.
It's my hug, basically, to anybody we can give that hug to, because they've been looking after us, so, you know, we should give a bit back.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. The official explanation for Boris Johnson being absent from today's emergency debate on standards was, of course, not because he wanted to dodge the fury of many MPs who felt outraged by the government's conduct last week. No, Downing Street said he already pre-arranged a visit to a hospital that was simply too far away to make it back to Westminster in time. If he had been present in the Commons, he would have faced a full broadside of angry allegations that he had tried to shield a former cabinet colleague found guilty of breaking the rules on lobbying. As it was, Mr Johnson's absence seemed to fuel the fury of Sir Keir Starmer, who accused him of running scared and having self-preservation, not the national interest, as his primary concern.
If the government hoped the Owen Paterson affair could be swept away along with the autumn leaves, recent headlines proof that this crisis is only getting deeper for the Tories, with an uncomfortable spotlight being shone on sleaze every passing day. The Prime Minister himself decided not to attend today's emergency debate on standards after last week's botched attempt to rewrite the rules to save Mr Paterson from suspension. He found a pressing engagement 300 miles away.
Will you apologise for the way you dealt with the Owen Paterson and Parliamentary Standards affair last week?
So what we've got to make sure is that we take all this very, very seriously and that we get it right. And there's a debate today. Unfortunately, I can't be there because I've had a long-standing engagement up here.
To be clear, Prime Minister, you're not going to apologise for the way you acted last week?
Look, I think it's very important that we get this right, and we are going to make every effort to get it right, and we are going to hold MPs to account.
His absence provoked anger in the Commons.
He does not even have the decency to come here either to defend what he did or to apologise for his actions. Rather than repairing the damage that he's done, the Prime Minister is running scared. When required to lead, he's chosen to hide.
Half-empty Tory benches showed much of the party couldn't stomach the debate either. Discomfort written across the faces of those who did.
I would like first and foremost to express my regret and that of my ministerial colleagues over the mistake made last week. We recognise that there are concerns across the House over the standards system.
While there were few Tories prepared to defend the government's handling of the issue, there were those, on the other hand, who stood up for the process that found Owen Paterson guilty of lobbying.
I am a proud member of the 2019 intake that came to this House determined to deliver a better politics for my constituents. I want a free and fair standards process that allows me to look my constituents in the eye and say, no, we are not all the same.
Even though Mr Patterson has now resigned, the repercussions of the affair are reverberating through politics. Labour are demanding an investigation into how Randox, one of the companies employing Owen Patterson, came to be awarded COVID contracts of almost £600 million. Separately, the SNP have asked the police to look at allegations that Tory donors are being rewarded with seats in the House of Lords. And Boris Johnson has his own problems to deal with. Renewed questions being asked over the refurbishment of his Downing Street flat and his holiday at a Marbella villa owned by the Tory minister, Zac Goldsmith. There will now be a by-election in Mr Patterson's constituency. Some voters there today sounding a warning for the Tories.
I'm certainly very disillusioned with Boris Johnson. I don't think he's treating Parliament in the way it deserves to be treated.
Most of them are corrupt. And that's the problem. No one trusts any of them.
Whether it's right or wrong, everybody in every aspect of life does things that are a little bit questionable.
The Speaker, who's called the episode a dark day for politics, has urged MPs to find cross-party agreement on how to reform the standards process. The only consensus so far is anger at the mess politicians find themselves in. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
And Robert is here to talk about all this. Look, last week, as you so eloquently said so many times, hundreds of Tory MPs risked their party's reputation, their own personal reputations, because they said this issue was so important. Today, they didn't even bother to turn up to debate it. Most people will find that incredible, won't they?
Well, let's be absolutely clear about what happened last week. Last week, they were bullied to turn up and vote, in many cases, against their own consciences, because they knew that their colleague, Owen Patterson, however much they liked him, had broken the rules. And there was such an extraordinary backlash and outcry, both in Parliament and some more widely in the country. Their inboxes were filled with complaints from their constituents about them apparently, ignoring what many voters think of as sleaze and trying to get their mate off the hook. The government went into a U-turn. Today we saw a debate on this calamity. Boris Johnson doesn't turn up. He sends a more junior minister along, Steve Barclay, who did apologise. Let's be absolutely clear. He said he regretted on behalf, he said he wanted to express his regrets on behalf of the government for the mistake. But it wasn't Stephen Barclay's decision to try and trample on the normal process. It was Boris Johnson's decision to trample on the normal process. And let's be out, it's not without precedent for prime ministers to cancel visits to hospital. He could have to a hospital just to do a sort of PR thing. He could easily have come today, but he couldn't face the embarrassment of standing up in the Commons and apologising. And no wonder so few of his MPs say, I did the count today, 46 I saw right at the beginning, the opposition bench is full. No wonder they didn't bother to turn up. And pretty much every Tory MP who did turn up, let's be clear, made no defence of Owen Patterson. They all think he was guilty. And most of them attacked the government for, in a sense, trying to get him off the hook. Now we are left with this extraordinary situation, which is that what his MPs were forced to vote for last week, which is a brand new committee, to reform the conduct system, the system for disciplining MPs. Nobody wants it anymore, but it's still there. Its chairman stood up today and said, I don't want to chair this. Nobody wants it. There's going to have to be another vote next week. There's going to have to be another debate next week. And the mistake that Boris Johnson made in not saying sorry today means he'll have to say sorry probably next week. The embarrassment for him will go on.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Now, in his first news conference since taking charge, Yorkshire County Cricket Club's new chair delivered an impassioned apology today to the player who turned whistleblower after being subject to racist abuse. Lord Patel's message to the cricketer, Azim Rafiq, was to promise urgent and seismic change at the club in response to what he went through, and to both thank him and indeed praise him for his bravery in making his ordeal public. But in an exclusive interview with us, another former Yorkshire cricketer described years of racist abuse at the club and said little has been done to stop it.
Lord Patel, the man charged with tackling a crisis that's revealed a dark and ugly side to cricket's most famous county, costing its sponsors, international matches and, most significantly, its reputation.
Let me be clear from the outset. Racism or any form of discrimination is not banter.
Patel's first decisive move to settle an employment tribunal with Azim Rafiq, the former player whose allegations have brought the club to its knees. He's been compensated and is free to talk publicly about his experiences.
Azim is a whistleblower and should be praised as such, and he should never have been put through this. And I'd like to apologise to him. We're sorry for what you and your family experienced and the way in which we've handled this.
In a statement today, Rafiq described his settlement as a start, but also urged 2 senior executives and many on the current coaching staff to quit to make way for change.
Can you see really regaining that trust unless you have a whole new leadership team in place?
When trust like this has been shattered, you really need to look at, inevitably, leadership is important in any of those circumstances.
This is me as a fresh-faced 14-year-old.
Tabassum Bhatti is another former player who claims he suffered racist abuse. Part of Yorkshire's academy in the late 90s, he told ITV News today he was targeted by teammates on a near daily basis.
Things really need to change. And I've got young children, I've got a young boy who's 6, I've got a girl who's 2. Would I want them to experience what me and Azim have been through? And other players that have come forward and have experienced, do I want them to go through that? No. Would I want my children to be affiliated with Yorkshire County Cricket Club? Definitely not.
And he says he wasn't the only one singled out.
We had a West Indian player at the club, and when they used to see a rain cloud, a dark rain cloud, they wouldn't say a dark rain cloud's coming, they'd say this player's name is coming. This is a black player.
There is quite an inbox sitting on Lord Patel's desk, and the task to repair this famous old club's reputation is littered with many more uncomfortable days.
And Steve is at Headingley Cricket Ground tonight. Steve, quite honestly, it doesn't sound much like this scandal is over.
No, Tom, I don't think it is. I think the club will be hoping that today marks something of a turning point. But you have to remember, the report into this whole affair has not been made public yet. We know that the former England captain Michael Vaughan is named in it, but my understanding is that the number of current and former players named runs into double figures, and some of them are pretty well known. Now, a week tomorrow, the chief executive here, the director of cricket, and Azim Rafiq are due to give evidence before MPs. Now, that session's going to be held under parliamentary privilege, which basically means the participants can say what they like without any worry about any legal recourse. And then today, Lord Patel announced this whistleblowers hotline encouraging anyone connected with Yorkshire County Cricket Club in the past who feels like they've been discriminated against to come forward and tell their story, which means it's very likely that the club here will hear of new cases that as of today they are not aware of. So I think for the club to get to where it eventually really wants to be is going to be quite a painful process.
OK, Steve, for now, thank you very much indeed. Just a few months ago, the Afghan crisis unfolding before the eyes of a horrified world saw tens of thousands of people scrambling to escape as the Taliban swept to power. Well, those scenes have tonight been replaced by new images of human desperation of a nation on the brink of humanitarian disaster. The World Food Programme estimates 23 million Afghans are threatened by starvation, with nearly 9 million already on the edge of famine. 95% of people don't have enough food, and it's the children whose suffering makes the crisis so hard to witness, as you're about to see.
His every breath is an act of defiance, for the odds on survival are stacked against Mohammed, as they seem stacked against Afghanistan as a whole, and its hungry children in particular.
Currently, today we have 18 patients admitted in the hospital in the malnutrition wards today, but it may be increased after 1 hour or 2 hours. When I asked the mother and father about all of complaint from the poority and don't have food.
Here, half the young patients are sick because they're starving. In Kabul, this place is their last hope. Marwa is 2 years old and half the weight she should be. Her mother has travelled 3 hours to give her daughter a chance.
صحتش امشو بیخی خراب شد دیگه مرد دیگه خدا صاحب زندهش کردم دکترها یک ذره سیروم پیچکاری دادن نه دیگه از شفاخانه خارج شدیم دیگه تغذیه هم کردن نمیتونیم دیگه دوایی که اینجا تبلیغ میشه اونجا خود نیست.
It's a crisis long predicted and far-reaching. The same distressing scenes in a hospital in Herat in the far west of the country. When the Taliban took power, foreign aid took flight, and hospitals are paying the price, one doctor told us.
و همین دوایی که به حساب مریضای مز یونیسف کمک میکردن حالا قطع شده برای اینا داده نمیشه و مریضای ما که اصلا همگیشون نمیشه فاخانه خودشون.
Spiralling prices, drought, a disastrous harvest, they've all conspired in a cruel winter of desperate need. The freeze on aid was meant to punish Afghanistan's hardline rulers. Instead, it's the innocent who suffer.
The situation is dire and it's getting worse by the day. I think it is unconscionable for us to stand by and watch children die, and that is what is going to happen.
When the world withdrew from Afghanistan, it meant to isolate the Taliban, but it has also abandoned its children to a dreadful fate. John Ray, News at 10.
Those are difficult scenes to witness and likely, very sadly, to get worse. Now, it is feared that the global migrant crisis has found a dangerous new flashpoint tonight on the eastern border of both the European Union and NATO, between Poland and Belarus. A huge group of migrants, thought to number in their thousands, has massed on the Belarus side of the border. Several migrants are said to have died. Others have reportedly tried to breach the fences using branches and wire cutters. 12,000 troops are being deployed to the Polish side of the border. Germany has accused Belarus, whose president Alexander Lukashenko is already facing EU sanctions, of acting as a human trafficker. The Health Secretary Sajid Javid appeared before the House of Commons today to apologise to all those affected by the hideous crimes of David Fuller. Fuller, who'd already murdered 2 women, then went on to use his job in a hospital mortuary for the systematic sexual abuse of the corpses of at least 100 more women. The Health Secretary announced a new independent inquiry into how Fuller was able to carry out his attacks undetected for more than a decade, and to stop anything like it, of course, ever happening again. The cheers rang out tonight after a man was finally brought to the surface after being trapped deep underground for 54 long, tense hours. Nearly 250 people took part in the extraordinary and complex rescue operation beneath the Brecon Beacons in Wales. An experienced caver, he apparently fell and injured himself while exploring the underground system on Saturday.
On a Welsh mountainside, the emergence of 2 headlights signalled a happy ending to an epic rescue. Inside the 4-wheel drive ambulance, a caver on his way to hospital after 2 days and 2 nights trapped underground. For the rescue teams who'd brought him to the surface, exhausted relief that he's finally safe.
It's amazing. I mean, it's just such a great moment. We don't normally celebrate at the end of a rescue, but we all stopped and cheered tonight. Yeah, it was a special moment.
Happy, relieved, and it'll also be nice to just go and have a cup of tea as well and relax.
This is the culmination of one of the largest and certainly the longest cave rescues in Welsh history. 250 volunteers who over 55 gruelling hours have brought one of their own to safety. This was their challenge. A training video filmed in the same cave provides an insight into the terrain that rescue teams had to navigate a stretcher through. The injured man had fallen on Saturday afternoon while inside Ogof Ffynnon Dŵ, the 3rd largest cave in Great Britain, a 31-mile maze of passages, waterfalls and canyons. At a depth of more than 300 metres, it's the deepest in the UK, with 3 entrances. Where the injured caver went in isn't wide enough for a stretcher, so rescuers chose this top entrance to bring him out.
So there are rescues that have been longer, where people have been perhaps trapped by floodwater, but this is the longest time someone's been carried in a stretcher, as far as we know, in the UK. So that's quite an achievement, and without the ability of all the different teams to work together, that wouldn't have been possible.
This was an experienced team. Some of those leading it helped save 12 young Thai footballers and their coach from flooded caves 3 years ago. Though the man they rescued tonight has multiple injuries, they are not life-threatening. And perhaps surprisingly, after 2 days underground, he's said to be heading to hospital in good spirits. Ben Chapman, News at 10, the Brecon Beacons.
Now, the COP26 summit in Glasgow had a big name as its main guest today. As you can probably see, the former president, Barack Obama, arrived to shed some of his undoubted stardust on the day's proceedings before giving delegates a typically forthright reality check.
We are nowhere near where we need to be yet. For starters, despite the progress that Paris represented, most countries have failed to meet the action plans that they set 6 years ago.
Well, the summit's main theme, Adaptation Day, was all about what climate change means to communities on the front line. So we went to two contrasting places in the US, one on the East Coast, racked by storms and rising waters, and one on the West, where deadly wildfires have wreaked massive destruction.
Heavenly Father, please help us.
Those who fled the town of Paradise exactly 3 years ago were changed forever. The wildfire roared through their community, killing at least 85. Today, Paradise is still deeply scarred, but now pioneering new ways to build back stronger, with more resiliency to withstand climate change. Melissa lost both her home and her business in the fire.
Doesn't matter how you live or how much money you have, you are equally as vulnerable to this kind of disaster.
Now the community is rebuilding differently, burying power lines, using concrete, not wood, for construction, and creating multiple escape routes for the next fire.
We're out of time. This is serious now. I don't know how many instances and examples of climate change we need to see to know that we have to make a change now.
And if drought and fire is the curse out west, on America's East Coast, the problem is rising sea levels and flooding. Superstorm Sandy in 2012 was the great wake-up call, forcing coastal communities from New York to Florida to reevaluate how they defend against a rising ocean. Thanks for having me on board. Sure. Appreciate it very much. Thousands of miles from Paradise on the Chesapeake Bay, Americans here are also learning they must adapt. Those who make their living on the bay are seeing the changes for themselves.
Varying wind patterns, different sea levels being higher than what you're used to. I grew up here. I mean, I spent my whole life here pretty much, and I'm less than 40. I can see differences from when I was a child.
With its 3,000 miles of tidal shoreline, Maryland is vulnerable to rising sea levels. And its oyster farmers are not just observers of the problem here, they are also potentially part of the solution. That's because oyster reefs help dissipate wave action and grow upwards with a rising sea. One example of how nature's forces can be used to mitigate climate change. Scientists say climate resilience involves harnessing nature, not fighting it.
Underwater grasses mitigates the wave action. If you have healthy marshes, that mitigates the amount of water that could flow in. One of the challenges isn't only that the seas are rising, but then when you put on a large hazard like a hurricane on top of that, that's that much more energy that's coming into the land.
For a nation battered by fire and by storms, learning to live with extreme weather is becoming the essential survival skill. Robert Moore, News at 10 in the United States.
There will be many moments to be treasured forever when families and friends are reunited by today's resumption of transatlantic flights after nearly 2 years. And there are also, of course, the signs of relief from businesses and airlines. It was marked by a unique synchronised takeoff at Heathrow Airport this morning.
They have waited months for this moment. At New York's JFK Airport, face masks were torn off as couples were reunited and families held each other close once again. America reopened its borders to dozens of countries today. The first British flights took off in tandem, a rare show of unity from two of aviation's biggest rivals. For Virgin Atlantic and British Airways, this stunt was a way of celebrating the end of a travel ban that's kept loved ones apart for more than 600 days.
My sister lives there and we haven't actually met her since 2019, so really excited to go there today.
We've been waiting for a big family holiday for about 2 years. We're trying to get it organised now, so yeah, just really excited because it's been cancelled and postponed so many times.
But for anyone wanting to travel, there are a few rules. Adults have to be fully vaccinated and take a private COVID test no more than 3 days before leaving, or show proof you've had the virus in the last 3 months. Children under 18 don't need to be vaccinated, but must take a test before and after arrival. And when you get home, you'll have to take a test 2 days after you land.
2021, we are open!
New York is eager to welcome tourists back, but for a range of indoor activities, including going to the theatre, to a gig or a restaurant, anyone over 12 will have to prove they've had at least 1 dose of the vaccine. Restrictions vary from state to state. Going on holiday isn't as straightforward as it was. But the resumption of transatlantic travel is a big moment for the airline business.
The UK and the US corridor is one of the most important corridors in the world in terms of aviation. $270 billion of trade between these two countries. Families and loved ones, of course, need to be reunited. So a very big day.
He will be hoping that today's takeoff serves as a metaphor for the industry's direction of travel. Chloe Keedy, News at 10.
Finally, as well as those transatlantic flights starting up again, there was another sign tonight that COVID spirits are finally lifting. It's difficult not to be cheered up by Rick Astley and his concert packed to the gills with frontline NHS staff tonight. Testimony both to him and to those he gave the concert for.
They had come to let their hair down at their own special Rick Astley thank you gig, which because of the pandemic and rescheduling had taken a year and a half to get to the stage. For these NHS and emergency workers who got tickets, they all went in 20 minutes. Tonight's concert was gratefully received.
Just to have the recognition, it does make a big difference for us. Definitely. It's like we're clapping for the NHS as well. That was really, really good as well.
We're not admin, but I think they've realised that it's all of us that have a part to play to make the whole role happen. So, yeah, it's really nice.
I couldn't believe it when I was upstairs on my phone trying to get tickets in the queue, and he was downstairs, and I missed my place in the queue, and then he went, I got them! So we're really pleased, really grateful to him for doing this.
You know you can be. With clapping for carers perhaps a distant memory, Rick Astley says for him it's a reminder that the NHS continues to make sacrifices.
We take it for granted. We're lucky to live in a country where we can take something like that for granted. It's my hug, basically, to anybody who we can give that hug to, because they've been looking after us, so, you know, we should give a bit back.
Other artists like Liam Gallagher have also staged free concerts to thank healthcare workers, and Astley says these initiatives should, if possible, continue.
Either to raise funds to throw back at the NHS, or just
aren't
to give food
either,
to
but I
people
wonder
who work in the NHS. I think it's not a bad idea to say, well, every tour that you do, why not do a gig for others? Do you know what I mean? And I do think the music community would definitely feel that. I think they'd be well up for that.
Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down.
This Saturday in Manchester, he's putting his words into action with a second free gig for healthcare workers. Nina Nanar, News at 10 at Wembley.
What a great place to end. That's it. See you tomorrow. Good night. Thanks for watching.